Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, the question that I will be answering is, how does continually committing venial sins affect your ability to recognize and avoid mortal sins? Can it really dull your moral judgment that much? So, maybe we might not know what that term venial sins mean. A venial sin is a sin that we consider to not be very serious. And that idea of a sin not being very serious, for some people, it comes from 1 John chapter 5, verse 16, where he said, "If any man see his brother sin a sin which is not unto death, he shall ask, and he shall give him life for them that sin not unto death. There is a sin unto death. I do not say that he shall pray for it." But we shouldn't be fooled. God has often lashed out quite harshly at sins that humans would naturally have overlooked. A typical example was that of Uzzah. He quite genuinely wanted to restabilize the Ark of God that was to fall from the cattle that carried it, but God killed him on the spot because he wasn't qualified to touch the Ark of God. If you read 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 6 to 7. God commanded also that a man should be killed just because he picked sticks on the Sabbath. If you remember Numbers chapter 15, verses 32 to 36. So there's really no such thing as a small sin. Or even if there is, I don't think we want to gamble or try to figure out what God considers to be small or big, because if we get it wrong, right? Moses lost his ability to enter the land because of what you could consider a small sin. If you read Numbers chapter 20, verses 10 to 12. So we want to run away from that, okay? And that's why as Christians, we need to consider sin as sin. All sin is to be avoided at all costs, no matter how small. King Solomon advised, "Enter not into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of evil men. Avoid it. Pass not by it. Turn from it, and pass away." That's Proverbs chapter 4, verses 14 to 15. David demonstrated the proper attitude we should have to approaching seemingly small sins. When he expressed his thirst for water to his army, 3 men went at the risk of their lives to bring water for him. David immediately recognized once they brought the water to him that it would be a sin for him to drink that water because but for God's deliverance they would have died. And so instead of drinking it, he poured the water out as an offering to God. If you read 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verses 16 to 19. One might wish to argue that drinking a bit of water wouldn't amount to a significant offense. But David, who was a prophet of God, knew that God would be angry if he did so. Committing sins deliberately, no matter how small, means that we don't have regard for the atonement of Jesus Christ to redeem us from sin. Jesus will not die again to save us from the sins we willingly commit today. Hence, by committing deliberate offenses, we are doing so at the expense of our own salvation. For if we sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries. That is Hebrews chapter 10, verses 26 to 27. And then the second part of this question was talking about whether sinning repeatedly can dull our moral judgment. And the Bible says, yes, our conscience can become defiled or evil, and our moral judgment becomes skewed towards iniquity. Apostle Paul said to his spiritual son Timothy, "Unto the pure all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure, but even their mind and conscience is defiled." That is Titus chapter 1, verse 15. Paul also spoke about men whose conscience was seared with a hot iron in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2. Having such a conscience makes men to sin more and more, because they see good as evil and evil as good, to quote Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. In the Bible, this state is called delusion, a never-ending cycle of evil, a sinful feedback loop that reinforces itself until one is utterly destroyed, according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11. So, I hope the point is clear. There is no such thing as a sin that is not serious. Of course, there are forgivable sins and unforgivable sins, right? Matthew chapter 12, verses 31 to 32. But having the attitude of there are certain sins I can get away with and there are certain sins, you are going to, by mistake, commit the sin that God will take very seriously. Because that attitude is not the right attitude to have. The right attitude to have is sin is bad. It doesn't matter how small, right? Every thing in which we do to stray off the path of righteousness is bad and must be avoided at all costs. That is how, at the end of the day, you live a life that is perfect and well-pleasing to God. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I would like to see you all in the next one.